Hello, my name is Scott Thomason. In a past life, I was a federal agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives and served for over 26 years in that capacity. I had many jobs, the most recent including the Chief Firearms Operation, Chief Public Affairs, and Chief International Operations. I'd like to talk to you today about ATF and give you some insight on how ATF works organizationally, structurally, a little bit about its history, and more importantly, what you should do if you encounter an agent or inspector, their roles and responsibilities, and some of the things that you probably need to be aware of but have yet to even think about. So ATF is a national law enforcement agency, and it is the same agency as the FBI, DEA, U.S. Marshal Service. Now, when I say the same agency, obviously I'm not talking about they have the same mission, but they operate on the same plane as the other federal law enforcement agencies in the United States. Some of the things to remember is there are 25 field divisions within ATF, and those field divisions can take the size of multiple states, half a state, and those field divisions have 400 field offices that operate underneath them. Presently, you'll see a breakdown of the different states and the different field divisions. It is imperative that you know which field division you're in and which field offices that you fall under. And that's important for several reasons. If you ever had a burglary or theft, or if you ever need to get in touch with an agent, you should have your local office. If you ever have a question with the inspection, you should know which office to contact. And it may be just around the corner. Within each 25 field divisions, above them are 7 separate directorates. Now, all field operations are run under the Field Operation Directorate. And then the other 6 directorates run the agency. There's a separate directorate that actually runs all the laws, rules, and regulations and the policies that govern the law enforcement and inspection and regulatory function of ATF. Being in the firearms industry, what you'll actually be doing is straddling 2 directorates. You'll have one directorate which will be providing the policy for you to be able to conduct your business, but you'll have a separate directorate which will actually be enforcing those regulations, and you'll be dealing with the people of that directorate. When ATF moved to the Department of Justice in 2003, it lost some of its tax collection function, which was broken off and remained with Treasury and what is now called the TTB, Tax and Trade Bureau, which is responsible for looking at liquor, licensing, and labeling of all distilled and fermented products. It's also responsible for the collection of taxes within the tobacco industry. What did go to the Department of Justice were the regulatory function for firearms and explosives, along with the law enforcement function for violent crime, firearms, explosives, and tobacco smuggling. So ATF, as it remains in the Department of Justice, is actually an agency which has 2 separate and distinct functions. One function is the industry operations function, and that function is basically responsible for ensuring that all of those who have a federal license to deal in explosives or in firearms are within full compliance of all the laws, rules, and regulations. The other side of the ATF function is in the law enforcement function. What I'd like to do is speak about the industry operations function at this time. There are approximately 600 industry operation investigators, and they're responsible for inspecting every explosives permittee and licensee in existence that deals in explosives. Additionally, there's approximately 55,000 federal firearms licensees, gun dealers, retailers, that they're responsible for inspecting, along with all the wholesalers, distributors, and manufacturers. These inspectors are highly trained in audit functions and apply several audit standards which are used today in the banking and investment industries. These functions have to do with looking at the actual inventory on hand and comparing that to the records which are available. It is absolutely imperative that all records are kept pristine and in full compliance with all rules and regulations. You can lose your license for having multiple small violations or for having several very big violations. One of the things that you must remember whenever you encounter an industry operations investigator is that they're there to look, review, and audit your records every year, and no more than once every year, in what is called an administrative function. And that function is a review of how well you're doing within the industry and following the laws and rules and regulations. If you encounter somebody on the criminal side, they can come as often as they want. Now, they're not actually inspecting your business, but what they're doing is seeking to gather evidence of a crime, a federal crime or state crime. And they can come into your store as often as they like. Whenever you encounter an industry operations investigator, understand that they're there doing their job. Part of the dilemma that they have is that the laws, rules, and regulations which were written by Congress have a lot of gray area, and they're left up to a tremendous amount of interpretation. So what you may have received as what you believe solid information from one inspector may not be the same information that you receive from another inspector. There's a tremendous amount of inconsistency in the application of the regulations, and that's not due to the efforts of ATF as much as it's due to the amount of gray area that exists within the regulations. Now, obviously, there are some regulations which do not have gray area, and those are very straightforward. But again, when it's left up to interpretation, the best thing to do is try to educate yourself as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. Take time to read the White Book. Take time to ask a lot of questions. Take time to get the responses that you need in writing. What I'd like to do right now is provide some helpful tips for all federal firearms licensees when dealing with inspectors. Be personable, be helpful, help them get what they need so that they can get out of your business as quickly as possible and allow you to get on with business as quickly as possible. Many places, if they have the room available, create a separate workspace for the inspector. They take time to actually have their records keeper work with the inspector at the inspector's request to provide the information necessary and needed. It behooves you to try to get the inspector everything that they might need so that they can do the most thorough and complete inspection possible. Also, it behooves you to do so they don't mistakenly cite a violation that really didn't occur, because it is far easier to stop a violation at the beginning than to try to unwind one once it travels down the road a little bit. If you have several violations, you might have to deal with a warning letter. And that warning letter is ATF's notification to you that they have found some material issues with the way you're conducting your firearms business. And they are putting you on notice that they have found material issues, and they're actually stating what those are. You need to work very hard to correct those material issues because they will be back in a year. If they find issues that are far more significant, you could find yourself in a warning conference. And that warning conference is a personal meeting between you and the industry members that oversee your business or the area of your business. And in that meeting, they will bring you in and they will sit down with you and explain exactly the seriousness of the issues that they've found, and will actually deal with you and trying to help you mitigate those issues. Now, they will be back in a year, and it is incumbent upon you to make corrective action. If they find that you have not made the corrective action necessary in the next year, or that you have other material issues, they'll move right to revocation. Revocation is a costly function, and very rarely does ATF lose its revocation hearings. One of the things you need to consider is we need to back it down from the warning conference. And the best way to do that is becoming hypervigilant and uber compliant with all the regulations and ensuring that ATF realizes that you take these regulations serious and you take your responsibility as a gun dealer very seriously and as a member of the community. One of the areas that I'd like to talk about for a second is who you would actually deal with when an ATF agent or inspector comes into your building, your business, or your office. And more importantly, I'd like for everybody to understand exactly where they are in the food chain and how far up from the agent or inspector all the way up to the field division and then back up to headquarters. When you're dealing with an agent inspector in the field, they are the investigator for that specific geographic area. Now, they can investigate anything across the country, but for your specific incident, whether it be a criminal investigation or an administrative investigation into a regulatory function, they are the person that you're going to be dealing with. Now, they all report to, on the agent side, a resident agent in charge or group supervisor, and they are the first-line supervisor on the law enforcement side. On the industry operations side, they'll be responding to an area supervisor, and they're the first-line supervisor for that inspector. Now, those first-line supervisors are responsible for overseeing the investigations and the activity of their subordinates. And just as importantly, they're the reviewers of all of the documents that are produced by the agent and inspector, whether it be an interview of one of your employees, collecting a record that's necessary for a criminal investigation, or even a review of 4473s and the outcome. The area supervisor, the group supervisor, or the resident agent in charge will be the reviewing person for that, and then they'll either send them back to gather more information or they'll pass it up the chain. At that point, it goes to an assistant special agent in charge, and the assistant special agent in charge has several field offices under his purview, and he is at the field division level. And on the industry side, there is a director of industry operations, equivalent to the assistant special agent in charge. They both report to the special agent in charge, which is the top individual for that field division. They are the field division commander. From the field division, special agent in charge, then it goes to headquarters, where headquarters has several deputy assistant directors under field operations, and each deputy assistant director has several divisions underneath them. And then it goes to the assistant director, who has all of the field divisions and all the field operations underneath them. And then it goes into the director of ATF. In dealing with the industry operations, investigator or an agent are who you will deal with 98% of the time. If you have an issue with that agent or inspector, you'll then deal with the area supervisor or the resident agent in charge. While you will probably never ever deal with anybody above that level, it is important to realize where they are and who sits above them for your information. The other side of ATF that I'd like to discuss with you today is the law enforcement section. And the law enforcement side of ATF is one that investigates violent crime. Firearms are the tools and the lightning rod of the criminals as they conduct the type of criminal activity that they do, whether it be assaults on individuals of all different types, whether it be robberies or narcotics trafficking. And ATF agents deal with narcotics traffickers, murderers, murder for hire, all types and levels of violent crime. If you encounter an ATF agent during an investigation of a violent criminal, more than likely what they're looking for are records and information and evidence and leads to resolve that violent crime in a positive fashion. One of the other areas that you might be dealing with on the law enforcement side is they're the side of the federal government that will investigate all burglaries, robberies, and in some cases, very tragically, homicides incurring the federal firearms licensees. It is actually a federal crime to rob an FFL. It is a federal crime to burglarize an FFL. And of course, while it is a state crime to commit homicide, it is also a federal crime to commit homicide against a federal firearms licensee. And oftentimes they'll investigate those crimes also. So from a law enforcement side, they're looking for the federal firearms licensee, the gun dealer, the retailer, to partner with it in resolving any issues that are coming in. The federal firearms licensee is the first line of defense. They're the ones who actually see the people coming into the store. They have the best ability to find the information possible which is needed by the agents, whether it's a license plate of a car, a description of an individual. They're the ones that are able to identify co-conspirators of a specific criminal who is actually purchasing the gun. And they want your help. So it is very imperative that you take a little bit of time and try to introduce yourself to the field office full of agents where you're operating. Also, if you feel suspicious about a transaction, you're not under any obligation to conduct that transaction. In fact, we would tell you do not conduct any transaction which you don't feel 100% comfortable in. Make a note of the license plate, make a note of the car, make a note of the description, and pass that information right along to ATF. If you encounter an ATF agent, one of the things you should be asking for is identification. Here are two badges that ATF uses, and both of these badges should be requested whenever they identify themselves. Take a minute, look at them, verify the picture on it. Oftentimes agents will come in and look for records, and some of the biggest questions that we have is whether or not you should actually provide those records to the agent. So what we would tell you is this, is if the agent needs a copy of the records, make a copy of the records, keep the original, and set the original aside so that you know where it is at all times. If they want the original, make a copy, keep the copy in your records, and have the agent sign a receipt that they took the original form. After all, you're responsible for that record. And with any law enforcement officer comes in and wants the original record, you should always make a copy of it, keep it in your file, and that individual or that officer should sign a receipt saying that they took the original. Now, why would they need the original? They may want to take a fingerprint, they may want to take some handwriting analysis off it, and which is totally fine and legal, and is actually necessary in certain types of criminal investigations. It's imperative that you handle your records in the correct way, so that if ATF came to inspect you after that officer or that agent had taken some of your records, that you can sit there and tell them what happened and then be able to show them, here are the records that were taken, and here is a receipt for those records. Now, while this makes up a very small part of their investigative portfolio, it is a very important one. And some of the things they investigate with regard to federal firearms licensees are dealing without a license, conducting straw purchases, providing firearms to convicted felons, dealing firearms off records, falsifying 4473s and falsifying the NICS check, not conducting multiple sales. The tremendous amount of experience of the ATF agent and the ability to use ATF investigators in ferreting out the source supply of guns is something that no other agency has, and has a wealth of experience that is only brought about by many, many years of doing this type of work. While it's often the agency that not many people understand, it is the agency that law enforcement calls upon to assist them in keeping their communities safer.